Yeah, so this year's theme, throughout Sangha Night we have a year-long theme, and this year's theme is the refuge tree of the Triratna Buddhist order. And it's a symbol that shows how the Dharma has come down from the teachings of the Buddha through the teachers of the past to our present Sangha in Sheffield. So it's how the teachings of the Buddha have arrived in their particular emphasis and form in the Sheffield Buddhist Centre to us. And one of the figures from the past who is particularly important for our movement is Padmasambhava, which is, and this is his name written up here, Padmasambhava. So Padma means lotus, and Sambhava means born from. So his name means something like born from a lotus, or sometimes he's called the lotus born guru. And so some of the figures on the refuge tree are mythical figures, and some of them are historical teachers from the past. And Padmasambhava falls into both of these categories. He's both a historical person, a figure from the past, from the 8th century in India and Tibet. And he's also a mythical figure with lots of legends and myths associated with him. He's also a very important figure for our particular movement, for the Triratna Buddhist community. And all the technical demons are being converted, that's exciting. So, for the founder of our, when we see if we see the refuge tree, we'll see Padmasambhava on there, and we'll see the Buddha, and we'll see Sangha, who is the founder of our movement. And he's got a particular connection with Padmasambhava, and Padmasambhava is a particularly important figure in our movement. And when Padmasambhava was on the border with Tibet, he was based in a town called Kalimpong for about 20 years or so, and teaching the Dharma out there. And he had a number of Tibetan teachers, and one of his teachers, called Kachu Rinpoche, initiated Sangha in practices associated with Padmasambhava, this figure Padmasambhava. And at the same time, Kachu Rinpoche gave Sangha the name Urgyen. So you might see on the plaque outside our Buddhist Centre, opened by Urgyen Sangha. And Urgyen means from the land of Urgyen, and Urgyen is the land the mythical figure of Padmasambhava originates from. So the name he gave him means that he comes from the same place as Padmasambhava. So Sangha comes from the same place as Padmasambhava. So Kachu Rinpoche gave him the title Urgyen Sangha. And there's a curious story as well, which gives you a bit of a kind of sense of the connection with Padmasambhava. So the day that Kachu Rinpoche gave these initiations to Sangha went out into Kalimpong, into the markets, and he saw a beggar. He saw probably somebody who used to be quite an important teacher, but was now destitute, selling scrolls and manuscripts. So Sangha wanted to help this person out, and he bought some of the scrolls and manuscripts. And when he opened them, he saw there was a picture of Padmasambhava inside, which was a coincidence because he'd just been given the Padmasambhava initiation. So he took them to Kachu Rinpoche, and Kachu Rinpoche was delighted. He said, these are the exact initiations I've just given to you, that you've just by coincidence bought from somebody in the street. So he said, this is a very auspicious sign. And so you get these kind of magical events around, events associated with Padmasambhava, and I'm quite drawn to that. And likewise, Padmaloka, our men's retreat centre, is named. The name Padmaloka means the realm of Padmasambhava, the lotus realm. And the day that Sangha decided to give it that name, on the grounds of the retreat centre, somebody found some images of Padmasambhava that no one knew had been there, and no one knew how they got there. They weren't anything to do with our movement. There's just some images that turned up on that same day. So there's lots of this kind of air of kind of mystery and magic associated with Padmasambhava, which I'm very drawn to. So, and we have a festival, we have a Padmasambhava day that we celebrate in our movement. So later this year, on Sunday we've got Buddha Day. Later in this year we'll be celebrating Padmasambhava Day. So, you start to see this figure of Padmasambhava is not just any old figure on the refuge tree. He's an important figure for our movement, for our Buddhist movement. So why is he so important? What's so important about Padmasambhava, and what does he represent? Well, to try and draw this out a bit, I'm going to tell a story. And it's a story of... I'll tell it you, and then you'll see what it's a story of. I won't give away the big time to start with. So the story starts in the 8th century of Tibet, which was when Padmasambhava was alive. And there was the king of Tibet was called Trisong Detsen. And he had recently become drawn to Buddhism. He wanted to... Tibet at the time was a very barbaric land, a lawless land, and he wanted to bring peace and harmony to his land, to Tibet. And so he had this idea, this great idea, well, I could convert Tibet to Buddhism, I could bring the Dharma, I could bring Buddhism to Tibet. So what he decided to do was to send for somebody from the great University of Nalanda, and he sent for, he was recommended somebody called Shantarakshita, who was a bodhisattva called Shantarakshita, who was an abbot, a scholarly monk, somebody who was very learned in the scriptures. Well, who better to establish a monastery? And that's what he wanted to do, is to found a monastery in Tibet and start a lineage of practice. So the Bodhisattva abbot Shantarakshita made the journey from India across to Tibet, and they decided to build their first monastery in Tibet at a place called Samye. So they were going to build this monastery at Samye. But unfortunately, it didn't all go according to plan. Yeah, unfortunately it didn't go according to plan. So what happened was that the place they decided to build the monastery was a place where there happened to be a rose bush, which was very important to a local Naga. So a Naga is a mythical creature which dwells in the depths and associated with being protectors, protecting treasure, protecting wisdom. So it just so happened that a local Naga was unhappy that they planned to build this monastery on the same site as his favourite rose bush. So it didn't go according to plan. So what happened was the abbot and his men, they constructed the walls of the monastery by day. And then they got up the next morning and there were no walls, there was no monastery. All of the bricks, all of the stones had just been put exactly back in their original places. And so they tried the next day they built the walls of the monastery. And the next day they got up and there was no walls, there was no monastery. All of the stones, all of the dirt were exactly where they'd been originally. And what was happening was that the Naga had enlisted the help of the local deities, gods and demons. And so what happened was, by night, all of the stones that had been laid by the men during the day, by night, the Naga and the demons and deities would just remove them, taking them back down again, and putting them back into the ground. And when Shantarakshita, the abbot, realised what was happening, he just said, well, this is no job for me, I can't do this. This job is impossible for me. I can't deal with these kind of forces, but I know a man who can. And, luckily, there was a character at the same university, Nalanda University, called Padmasambhava, and he said, "What you need Padmasambhava. You need Padmasambhava. He's the only person who can sort this out." So the king immediately sent a message to request that Padmasambhava come to his country, come to Tibet, and try and sort this mess out, try and sort these problems out. So it'd be good if we could have a picture of Padmasambhava. We've got an image, we've got a rupa on the stage there, we've got a statue of Padmasambhava, and we've got this painting by Arloka, which is at Padmaloka Retreat Centre, of the figure of Padmasambhava. So just to kind of give you a sense of why Padmasambhava might have been the man to send out for. So to begin with, he's wearing 3 robes. He wears a yellow robe, a blue robe and a red robe. He's wearing 3 different coloured robes. And that symbolises, well, Padmasambhava is a master of all of the 3 great ways of Buddhism, the 3 great traditions. He's a master of the whole Dharma. And in a way it symbolises, well, there's only one Dharma, there's one true Dharma, and Padmasambhava has mastered all of the Dharma. He's an enlightened teacher, and he's mastered all of the 3 great traditions. So he's not only a master of the doctrine and the practices, he's a master of the magical siddhis, the powers, he's a master of yoga, meditation, the tantra. He's a master, he's mastered all of the schools of Buddhism. In his right hand, he's holding a vajra. So for those of you that haven't seen, this is a vajra. And Padmasambhava is holding the vajra in a particular gesture. He's holding it in the demon subduing gesture, the demon subduing mudra, which is a bit like this. So a vajra is, well, a short explanation for vajra is, well, it's a weapon of wisdom, and it's the weapon of wisdom which is like a diamond and a thunderbolt which will cut through any obscuration, any defilement. So vajra, in some mythical stories from the Pali Canon, was threatened to be hurled at anybody who was getting in the way of the Dharma. And so it's got similarities perhaps with Western mythology of Zeus's thunderbolt or Thor's hammer. So this is a Vajra, and Padmasambhava is holding the Vajra in a demon subduing mudra. So he's not messing about. What else? So he's got an eagle or vulture's cap in his, feather in his cap. He's got an eagle's feather or vulture's feather. And this symbolises some more things as well. So he's got a real clarity of vision, just like a bird of prey. He sees things very, very clearly, very, very sharply. And a bit like a bird of prey, well, he can just gaze down on the chaos below. He can gaze on the chaos from a distance and just see things very, very clearly. And he's surrounded by movement and activity. So you'll see that the kind of his robes and his ribbons, they're flowing, they're blowing around him. And his right foot is stepping out of the lotus into the world. So it's a very active, dynamic figure associated with compassionate activity that wants to help beings, wants to wake beings up. He wants to save sentient beings. So he's a very active, there's a load of energy in that figure of Padmasambhava. And he's got a fierce gaze, which there's another image that shows. So the next image shows a fierce gaze of Padmasambhava. You also see the rupa down here. So he's particularly associated with having a fierce look in his eyes. And it's described as being a fiercely compassionate gaze. He wants you to wake up. Padmasambhava wants you to wake up. But he's not going to mess around. He'll wake you up at any costs. And so, yeah, basically, sometimes he's described as being the Vajra Guru who wants you to wake up. And, so he's got this this is characterised by this fiercely compassionate gaze of Padmasambhava. And if you go back to the previous image, and you see on the statue, he's holding in the crook of his right arm a staff, which is called a kapvanga. And this is associated with sometimes with the wisdom of Padmasambhava, which just point directly to something. But you'll notice on the rupa here, you'll see that in the middle spike of his kapvanga, there are 3 skulls. There's a freshly severed head. There's a head that's starting to decay, and there's a skull on the central spike of Padmasambhava's kapvanga. So what on earth is this all about? Well, there's very strong symbolisms around death and around impermanence, and just getting across a real urgency of practice. We need, Padmasambhava wants us to wake up, and we don't know how much time we've got to practice. So every moment of practice is really important. There's a real urgency with our practice, and this symbolism reminds us of that. And this is emphasised as well by in his hand he's holding a skull cup. So it's a cup made out of a skull, and inside there is a nectar of bliss, and it's the bliss that comes from compassionate activity, the compassion of a bodhisattva. It's sometimes associated with something that's called shunyata, the mystery, the void. But it's a nectar of bliss, and he drinks it out of a skull cup. So, yeah, you'll see, Padmasambhava is an interesting character. He's a colourful figure, an interesting character. He's not a kind of a dry, bookish, scholarly monk like the abbot Shantuakshi. Padmasambhava, yeah, he's the man that King Trisong Detsen needed. He was the only man who was going to sort this problem out. So King Trisong Detsen sent for Padmasambhava, and Padmasambhava came. He made the journey from India to Tibet. But he didn't go directly to the king as the king expected. Instead, what he did was he went round all of the valleys, all of the mountains, all of the caves of Tibet, and basically went on a mission one by one, subduing all of the demons of Tibet. He just went round one by one, all of the demons, and basically subdued all of them. But in this time, the king was growing impatient. He said, well, I've sent for this person, I've sent for this monk, this Buddhist monk, and he hasn't come. He's not come straight to me. He's messing me around. Where's this Padmasambhava that I've sent for? So he sent a number of messengers to Padmasambhava in this time, saying, get a move on, in effect. Come, I've sent for you. I'm the king. What are you playing at? But Padmasambhava took his time. He just went around the whole of Tibet, subduing the demons. But eventually, when he'd finished doing that, the king sent another messenger, and this time Padmasambhava agreed. He came to the king. And they followed a really kind of curious standoff in a way. So the king, he's the king of Tibet. He's called this Buddhist monk over from India. And he's expecting Padmasambhava, when he arrives, to bow to him. So the king's got all his entourage, all his ministers, his wives, his politicians, they're all surrounding him. And he's expecting Padmasambhava, this Buddhist monk, to come and bow down to him, to pay obeisance to the king. But he doesn't, Padmasambhava doesn't bow down to the king. So the king starts to feel a bit unnerved, a bit uncomfortable. He stands there waiting for Padmasambhava to bow. And there's a dialogue that's exchanged, which I'll read a bit of the dialogue that's exchanged between them. So the king stood there hesitant, and the Guru Padmasambhava sung of his greatness and nobility. I am Padmasambhava the sorcerer. Mine are the counsellings of the Dharma that transmutes the 5 poisons. I do not bid farewell to pleasures, I take them with me on the path. I exult in the 5-fold gnosis. I am Padmasambhava the king. Mine are the counsellings of the Dharma possessing authority in the 3 realms. I embrace and shake the profound cycle of causality. I accomplish every action, subjugating the mind itself. I am Padmasambhava the minister. Mine are the counsellings for entering into the Dharma, whatever one's past deeds. I watch over the ultimate outcome of desires. I look at the 3 jewels without averting my gaze. And then he goes on to address the king directly. And he says, you are king. Your lungs swell. Great is your power. Your liver is well satisfied. Sceptre in hand and haughty you stand high. But I, sire, will not bow down before you. And yet, in accordance with my conjoined vows, having come to the heart of Tibet, here I stay. Great king, witness, have I come? He spoke, turned his hands, and springing up from his finger, a miraculous flame seared the king's garments. King, ministers, courtiers could not withstand him. Bowing in unison, they prostrated themselves as though swept by a scythe. So that's, the incident of the standoff between the king and Padmasambhava. In a way, Padmasambhava was having nothing. Padmasambhava was just not interested in the power, the status associated with the king's riches, his fame. For him, that just meant nothing. And Padmasambhava is a character you don't mess with. So Padmasambhava, he's been around Tibet. He's converted all of the demons, all of the gods. He's got them on side. The next thing he does is he arranges a truce between the Naga king and King Trisondetsen. A truce is negotiated. And what then happens is that the Nagas help to build the monastery. So you get the men and the king's labourers building the monastery during the day, putting the bricks in place. And then at night, when they're fast asleep, the Nagas, the demons, the deities, build more bricks. They put more layers, even more layers onto the monastery. So they end up helping Padmasambhava. They become servers, protectors of the Dharma, and the monastery gets built twice as quickly. So it's a very good story. It's a very, very good story, which I like a lot. But what relevance does it have to us? What does this story about this ancient king of Tibet, and this interesting, colourful, magical figure, Padmasambhava? What relevance does it have for us? What might this story be illustrating? What might this story be trying to communicate? What might be the demons? What tears down our monastery? What gets in the way of our spiritual practice? What are the conflicts that we experience? One way to interpret this story, which I'm going to use to interpret the story, is in terms of our own practice and our own inner conflicts. So we come along to the Buddhist Centre. We do our 6-week course, our foreign course. We come to Sangha night, and we might come along with very, very good intentions and an idea of becoming, a nice person and a very good Buddhist. So we come along with very good intentions, but when we really commit to the spiritual path and we get more and more involved and we really commit, it stirs up our depths. All sorts of energies can be brought into play. The gods and the demons of the depths of the mind. And some of them might seem pretty demonic. Some of these energies that get stirred up might seem pretty demonic. And also, we become aware of our actual emotional responses to people. So we start to meditate, and we become aware of our actual responses to people. And they might have been different to what we thought they were. So, we might encounter greed, envy, jealousy, our desire for praise and status, craving for pleasure. We might become aware of hatred and ill will. And it's a common feature of when people first come along the Buddhist path, and you teach people the Metta-bhavana, a lot of people will come up and say, well, I can't think of anybody to put in the 4th stage of the Metta-bhavana. There's nobody I dislike, there's nobody that I don't get on with. And then, a few months down the line they've been practicing and they've got people queuing to be in the 4th stage of the Metta-bhavana. And all of a sudden they've come into contact with their actual emotional responses to people. And that can be unsettling as well. It can seem like there are demons trying to tear down our practice, sometimes it can feel like, well, we haven't made any progress. With the progress we've been making with our effort, our rational mind, it just seems like we're back to square one. It's been undone by our unconscious depths. So, it's not that we've gone backwards and we suddenly become more angry than we were. We've become more aware of our actual responses. So, then the question arises, well, if that's what might be signified by the demons and the depths in the story, well, why would we want to convert them? Why don't we just ignore them? Why don't we just, have nothing to do with these parts of us? Why don't we cut them off? Why don't we slay the demons and the dragon like St. George and the Christian myths? Why don't we just get rid of them? Well, the answer is, well, you can't cut off these energies because they're part of you. You can't just cut off part of yourself. And if you think in terms of cutting off these energies or slaying the demons or sending them to hell, what happens is a polarization. We become split, or we become alienated from ourselves, alienated from our actual emotional responses. And if we're practicing without being in touch with what's actually going on, our emotional responses, if we're alienated from our emotions, well, our practice can become dry, and it can become a real effort. A real effort to make progress and to practice. Before too long, you might find that the Naga in your depths will let you know about it. Your unconscious depths will take action to smash through the veneer and to tear down the monastery that you're trying to build on top of the depths. And I think a useful way to look at this process is the Noble Eightfold Path in terms of the path of vision and the path of transformation, which we look at on the intermediate courses based around this. And so we could see that the spiritual life starts with a vision of who we could be, what's possible, an idea of what could be possible for us. But what we can't do is throw out or bury who we are now. We can't just build that vision on top of who we are now by ignoring who we are now. What we need to do is transform ourselves. We need to transform our whole being in the light of the vision, which is the path of transformation. And the path of transformation begins with our emotions. We have to go into into our real emotional responses and transform them, and then transform our whole being in the light of our vision. We can't just kind of manufacture a new person, a new being, and ignore who we actually are, who we really are. And you might remember also from the intermediate course the story of the horse and the rider. So we tell a story on this course of, well, you might imagine that there's a rider which is on a horse, seated on a horse, and that represents our rational, intellectual mind, our conscious mind, who we are, who we identify ourselves with. And we might decide on the horse, well, we're going to go in that direction. That's the direction we want to go in. But the horse represents our unconscious drives, our emotions and volitions. And basically the horse just goes wherever it wants to go. The horse is in charge and it goes wherever it wants to go. So the horse might want to go after some nice food or hay, or a horse of the opposite sex. And basically, as a rider, we've got very little control over what the horse wants to do. So what we need to do is to transform our emotions. If we're in conflict with our deeper energies, if we haven't signed them up to our vision of our spiritual life, our spiritual ideals will be in trouble. The Nagas will tear down the monastery. But if we are able to harness our emotions and our deeper energies and get them behind our practice, well, then we can be really effective. We can be creative and dynamic. There'll be no stopping us. If we've got all our deepest energies behind our ideals, there'll be no stopping us. Another detail I like about the story of the King Tresendetsen and the abbot Shantu Akshita is, well, their decision to build the monastery on top of this rosebush, which really upsets the Nagas. And it just signifies, well, something about our depths and something about the Naga, which is trying to act to protect something beautiful. So the Naga is trying to, in a way, stop the destruction of this rosebush, something beautiful. by, in a way, the king and the abbot who've just got the wrong idea. So the scholarly intellectual abbot, well, he could be seen as like our rational mind, the rider of the horse, who's got an idea of what needs to happen, but he's basically ignoring what's there, ignoring our depths, our unconscious depths. So instead of he's trying to build a vision on top of the depths, instead of working from it, building something from it, from out of the depths. So going back to the story, well, Padmasambhava subdues the demons. He subdues the demons of Tibet. He negotiates a truce with the Naga king. And Padmasambhava is able to get the Nagas on his side. He's getting the Nagas in the depths in service of his practice, in service of the Dharma. So the humans build in the daytime. So that's got, for me, a symbolism of being, the awake, conscious mind. The humans, our rational mind, is building, is making effort during the daytime. And whilst they're asleep, completely unconscious, unaware of what's happening in the night time, well, the depths they're building, they're making even more effort. And that could really be, our practice could become like that, where we've just got unconscious energies and drives that are just really behind our practice without us having to consciously do that, make that happen. So that's why. So we've got a sense of what the depths and the demons might be. We've got a sense of why it might be important to try and harness these depths, convert the demons. It sounds like it might sound like a good idea. But how do we convert? How do we transform our depths? How do we get these deeper energies, these processes on side and behind our practice? Well, we use magic. We've got magic available to us. And we've got a magic spell called the System of Practice. This is a magic spell which is available to us in our Buddhist Sangha. So it's a 5-fold spell, and it starts with the first stage of integration. This is the first bit of magic we need to use to convert the demons. So the first stage begins with awareness, integration and awareness. And so to begin with, we might have spent our whole life trying to push away or bury the emotions and the drives that we don't really want to have anything to do with. We just tried our hardest to ignore them, to push them away. Keep them out of our mind's eye, put them in the shadows of our psyche so we can't see them. They're behind us. We can just forget about them. We don't want anything to do with them. But unfortunately, when you push your emotions and these drives into the shadows, well, you become blind to them, and you become completely unaware when you're acting them out. So we might be stuck in a particular view about the world, and it's completely obvious to everybody around us, but we can't see it. We're blind to it. We just can't see it. Or we might be completely oblivious to the fact we're sitting on loads and loads of anger, just completely oblivious to it, but it's obvious to everybody around us. So we can become blind to what's actually going on, to our emotions and our views about the world, if they're in the shadows, if we're not conscious of them, if we're not aware of them. But the process of integration begins with awareness, the magic of awareness. So we can begin to bring all of our views into the open, all of our emotions, all of our emotional responses, we can bring them into the open, into our conscious mind, so we can work with them. And we do that with the mindfulness of breathing. The mindfulness of breathing, as well as the metta-bhavana, they're both practices that help to bring our emotions and our views in more and more into our conscious awareness. We can become more aware of what's actually there. And it starts by becoming curious about our experience. Saying, well, that's interesting. Well, what's going on there? Why am I reacting in this way? What's actually happening? Why have I reacted like that? Just becoming curious about it. And then, rather than being caught up in a particular emotional response and blindly acting from it without realising, with awareness, we can observe what's happening. We can experience it fully and let it pass without having to act it out. And there's a symbol associated with this, which is Padmasambhava's demon dagger. So Padmasambhava has a demon dagger which he uses the very sharp point to pin down the demons. And this is a really strong symbol for me of what we can do with awareness. The real clear, sharp point of awareness that can just pin down a particular view of the world or a particular emotional response. And when we pin down a demon like that, well, we're not in the grip of it. The demon no longer has power over us. If we've got in our sights a particular view that's been troubling us, or a particular emotional response which causes problems, if we've got it clearly in our awareness, well, we're no longer in the grip of it. And so we can do that in meditation practice. You can label something when it comes up. That's anxiety, that's anger, that's jealousy. When something arises in or out of your meditation practice, you can use awareness to notice it and just label it and just let it pass. So when you do that, you're no longer caught up in the middle of it. The demon has no longer got you in its grip, but you're released from the spell of the demon. So that's the first stage, which is awareness and integration. And the second stage, the second magic part of our spell, is positive emotion. And this, for me, is the juicy stage of transformation, where we get right into the belly of the demon. We go right into the heart of our actual emotional responses, and we begin to transform them. So when we've begun with the magic of awareness to bring our emotional responses, our views into awareness, well, and when we're no longer in the grip of it, well, that produces a choice. We've then got a choice how to behave and how to act. And we can choose to act more ethically, more skillfully, in a way which aligns us more, connects us more with other people. It recognises our deep connection, our common humanity with other people. And then our narrow, our limited view of ourselves in the world starts to expand. We start to expand, we start to become a more positive person with more positive states of mind. So I like to see this stage as creating channels of volition or channels of intention which our emotions can flow down. First we need to become aware of our existing emotions, our existing habits, and then we need to create new channels, new volitions, new intentions so our emotions can flow in new directions, in positive directions. This is the stage of positive emotion and ethics. So these first two stages they're sometimes described as becoming a happy, healthy human being. And that's what we need to do to begin with on the spiritual path. We just need to become a happy, healthy human being. And you could see it as actually becoming like a bigger vessel, a bigger being. We harness more and more of our energies. We get the demons on side, as it were, and we become a bigger vessel which can contain these energies that we've got within us. So we're no longer confined to our narrow, cramped, selfish perspective on the world. And we start to become more expansive, positive beings. And we start to look to how we can contribute to the world, how we can make the world a better place. But if we do this, if we start to do this, it can sometimes mean confronting difficult truths about ourselves. Or it can mean acting in a way that's uncomfortable, an unusual way, going against our usual habitual patterns. And that can be uncomfortable. That can feel quite scary. And even sometimes that's something that we know is going to be really positive and beneficial for us. Well, it just seems sometimes easier to do what we're used to, what's more comfortable, even though we know it's causing us suffering. We just, in a way, what we're used to, what we know seems comfortable. What we don't know, even if we know it's going to be better for us, seems scary. So we don't, there's an uncomfortableness, a difficulty about acting in a new way. And this is the stage of spiritual death and spiritual rebirth. For our new positive self, our new being to emerge, well, our old way of being has got to drop away. The ways we used to relate to the world, the ways we used to act, our views about ourselves, well, they've got to die, they've got to drop away in order for a new, more positive, expansive being to emerge. And this is a stage of spiritual death and spiritual rebirth. And there's some more symbolism of Padmasambhava associated with this, which is the symbolism around the cremation grounds. So Padmasambhava, before he went on his mission to Tibet, in his own spiritual quest, he spent a lot of time meditating in cremation grounds. So he'd deliberately seek out the scariest, most dangerous places to go, and he'd go straight to them. He would sit and make himself a meditation cushion, perhaps on a pile of bones, and he would sit around the charred bodies of the cremation grounds, the corpses, the bones. He would go directly to the cremation grounds. And when Padmasambhava, in these cremation grounds, he was confronted by figures called Darkinis, which are more mythical figures. He was confronted by Darkinis, terrifying female forms, which might represent some of these deeper primordial energies within us all. So when we approach spiritual death, our fears of impermanence, our fears of change, our fears of death confront us. It can throw up some very deep, scary energies, some fears. But Padmasambhava, well, he subdued and he taught the Darkinis. He got them on side. He went into the difficult places, he faced these energies and he integrated them. So there's another image of a Padmasambhava refuge tree. And you can see Padmasambhava is often depicted by being surrounded by wrathful figures, surrounded by Darkinis and wrathful figures. Anyway, it just shows, well, he's got these energies in play. They're conscious, they're around him. He's subdued them, they're integrated. In a way, they become protectors figures that are protecting the mandala of Padmasambhava. And it's in doing this, through going through this process, these cremation ground processes, converted through spiritual death and rebirth, well, that's what gave Padmasambhava the ability to face and conquer and subdue the demons of Tibet. So we can view this symbolism of the cremation ground as representing spiritual death and spiritual rebirth, these third and fourth stages of the spiritual path, the system of practice. Going into situations that might be outside of our comfort zone, acting in ways that are outside our usual habits that are comfortable to us. And this might take different expressions for different people, depending on what are your particular habits that you need to let go of. So maybe we might find that, or perhaps it means taking on some responsibility, which we wouldn't have previously thought about taking on. It might be that we need to start to speak out, if usually we've had the habit of keeping our heads down and keeping out of trouble. And that might feel really scary, really uncomfortable, but that might be an area of spiritual death and rebirth. It could be letting go of the stories that limit us, that we tell ourselves, confronting the voices, the darkenies and the demons, the voices that say, well, I can't do that. I'm not that sort of person. So working with the discomfort of acting in a different way, acting in a creative way, not going along with our habitual response. So that's basically, we're becoming a happy, healthy being, we're changing who we are, we're creating a new identity, a more positive, expansive identity in these stages. But as our outlook broadens, as our perspective broadens, we begin to identify more and more with the spiritual welfare of other beings. We begin to identify with other beings' welfare, other beings' spiritual welfare. Our perspective begins to change. There comes a tipping point, which is spiritual death proper. Something very, very big shifts within our being. And this is a point when the depths are really transformed. When we see our own true nature and the nature of reality, well then we're compelled to help all beings. We want to help all beings to awaken. We can't help it, we're compelled. And we experience this as the bliss of the great love, Maha Maitri, for all beings, the great love and compassion of the Bodhisattva. And this is spiritual death proper, where this huge shift takes place in our being, in the depths of our being. And this is also referred to as the arising of the bodhicitta. It's described as the turning about in the deepest seat of consciousness. And this is the real magic. This is the real magic of the spiritual life, when our whole perspective on life shifts and our life becomes about saving other beings, helping other beings. The depths become completely behind us when our lives are behind. Our lives are about serving something beautiful and noble. The depths really come on board. And Shantideva, who we heard about in previous weeks, he described the bodhicitta as the alchemist's mercury that transmutes the base metal of our depths into the Buddha jewel. So it's this real shift in our being, this real shift in the depths of our consciousness that changes who we are into the Buddha jewel. So I like to see the universe as being magic and as being alive. You might have got a flavour of that from my affinity with Padmasambhava and the depths. But I'm the kind of person, I like to see the universe as being alive and as being magical. I like to, we could see the bodhicitta as representing the part of the universe that wants us to wake up. There's a part of the universe that is alive and magic and wants us to wake up. And you could also see that as being a part deep within your consciousness that wants you to wake up in your depths. And we could see ourselves and our practice as being, we're trying to align ourselves with that aspect of the universe, the bit of the universe that wants us to wake up. And one way to see Padmasambhava is as representing this force for radical transformation. Whether we see this as coming from deep in our own consciousness or as acting somewhere out there in the universe, it doesn't matter. We can see Padmasambhava as representing the principle of radical transformation, perhaps as a process deep in our being that wants us to wake up and get on with it, get on with what's really important. Or we could see Padmasambhava as that principle at work in the universe, acting to wake all beings from their sleep, wanting us to wake up and get on with it. So whether you see this force of awakening as coming from outside you or deep in your depths, it doesn't matter, but we need to be receptive, and this is this quality of spiritual receptivity. We need to be receptivity to this quality of awakening. We need to learn to listen to it, to listen to that voice that wants us to wake up. And we need to act upon it so it becomes a stronger and stronger influence in our lives. And this is the magic of spiritual receptivity. And Vidanya gave a talk a couple of weeks ago about how to invite the enlightened mind, how to approach the enlightened mind. And he particularly emphasised the importance of reverence. Vidanya emphasised, how reverence and receptivity are crucial if we want to overcome our limited perspective of life and align our mind with the enlightened mind, if we want to invite the enlightened mind. So whether we cultivate this through practices like the sevenfold puja or through exposure to the arts and to nature, it doesn't really matter, but we need to cultivate reverence for the ideal. We need to cultivate a real deep love for what's most important, for our ideals, for our vision really. We need to cultivate love for that and reverence. So perhaps we need Padmasambhava in our society more than ever. We need Padmasambhava more than ever right now in our Western society. And the legends say that Padmasambhava didn't die. Padmasambhava never died. So the legends have been reading from this kind of mythical text called The Life and Liberation of Padmasambhava. And there's loads of kind of legends and stories about Padmasambhava. But those stories say, Padmasambhava didn't die. He left Tibet and he travelled to the west. And he travelled to the west to take to a place called the land of the Rakshasas, something like that. And he travelled to the west to convert their demons. So, and he dwells in a copper-coloured mountain in a palace, waiting to subdue the demons of the west. So, it might be a coincidence, but it might be that we really need Padmasambhava to transform and subdue some of the demons in our society. So maybe we are the greedy Rakshasas of the West. Maybe we need Padmasambhava to tame some of these demons in our society. And what if there was a legend of the future, kind of a myth of the future, and they look back on our time, and what if we did invite Padmasambhava when he came? What would those stories say? Well, maybe they would say, they would tell a tale of an encounter between Padmasambhava and the terrifying monster, the Futsi 100. With a greedy belly and 100 arms. Maybe they would tell of him subduing the ferocious demons, credit crunch and climate change. Maybe he would sweep through the city, subduing the monsters of individualism and materialism, subduing the ogres of the advertising agencies and the media moguls. But when he finally arrived in our land, how would he greet our king? How would he greet our Prime Minister and our presidents of the West? What would that dialogue go like? Well, I imagine that the conversation might go something like this. Hello, Mr. Padmasambhava. Would you like to stay at Camp David with Mr. Obama? Or would you like to dine at Dining Street with Mr. Cameron? I am Padmasambhava the sorcerer. Mine are the counsellings of the Dharma that transmutes the 5 poisons. I do not bid farewell to pleasures. I take them with me on the path. I exult in the 5-fold gnosis. I am Padmasambhava the king. Mine are the counsellings of the Dharma, possessing authority in the 3 realms. I embrace and shake the profound cycle of causality. I accomplish every action, subjugating the mind itself. I am Padmasambhava the minister. Mine are the counsellings for entering into the Dharma, whatever one's past deeds. I watch over the ultimate outcome of desires. I look at the 3 jewels without averting my gaze. And you, Prime Minister of the barbarian West, greed, hatred and delusion rampage unchecked in your lands. Your people blindly consume everything in sight, tearing down the rainforests of other lands. Your population grows without restraint, using up the resources of one place and then pillaging the resources of others. Your sophisticated technology keeps your people entertained and distracted, whilst your planet races headlong into environmental disaster. You are the Prime Minister. Your lungs swell. Great is your power. Your liver is well satisfied. With your tightly pressed shirt and your limousine, you stand high. But I will not bow down before you. And yet, in accordance with my conjoined vows, having come to the heart of the West, here I stay. Great Prime Minister witness, have I come. So perhaps it might go something like that. But we need the help of Padmasambhava. We need the principle of radical transformation if we're going to tame the demons of our society. We need help and we need support if we're going to face and subdue our own deeper energies. We need to build creative, supportive conditions. Otherwise, we'll get swept along with the demons of wider society. So our lives need to become about serving something bigger than our narrow, selfish desires. We need to build Sangha. So Sangha provides a supportive context to transform our depths. Our friends point out the demons that we're blind to. Our friends point them out to us, the demons that we can't see. And they can help to draw out our positive volitions and what is highest in us. And also working, living together as Buddhists. Well, this is a great way of encountering your demons, coming up against your aversion, your ill will, and having supportive conditions to work with them. So ultimately, that's what this Buddhist centre's for. This Buddhist centre is not about being nice. It's not about looking spiritual. If it was about that, then the Nagas and the Depths would tear down the stones and the bricks and they put them back in the Peak District. So our Buddhist centre is not about being nice and looking spiritual. The Buddhist centre is a place of radical transformation. It's where we can leave behind our old, narrow, cramped ways of being and be reborn into our true nature, which is compassionate, wise, and pulsing with the creative energy of the depths.